of Lat Gemara. So the last thing that we learned was Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said three things. If something is yayin nesech, 100% that it was used for Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to drink it. You're not allowed to have hana from the Torah, and we already learned yesterday how we learned that out. We learned from Zivchei Mesim and so on. But also he says that anything you bring to Avodah Zarah has a din like tumas mace, which means that the wine itself is totally tamei, no different than if you touch the tumas mace, it's metame people as well. The second level is called stam yenam. Stam yenam is wine that we don't know if the guy used or didn't use, and the Chachamim decided to ban it. The main reason, as we discussed yesterday, was the main reason is because of chasnus. We'll learn later in the Gemara. We don't want to socialize too much. We're worried that there might be intermarriage. And once we created the Isser, we had to find another Isser precedent. So we looked at the other cases of wine, which is also Yayin Nesach. So we made it similar to Yayin Nesach. So not only did we ban eating, we also banned Hana, which for other things like Pas Akum and Bishalakim and those things, we didn't ban Hana. And then as well, when it comes to Tumah, it's no different than anything else. It itself is not tummy, but if it touches tumah, then it has all the same laws as tumah. That as a drink, it can only be metame, oichlin, and mashkin, food and drink. And then the third din, what he said, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is about the case where a yid gave wine for storage in a goy's place. Just before we do that, I just want to establish stam yenam, which is the cases today, generally stam yenam. In halacha, the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, in Kuf Chal Gimel, he rules that today the laws have changed because they're not really Avodah Avodah Zarah, which means he says that we are lenient, that even though Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira just ruled you're not allowed to have any benefit from Stam Yenam, but if, let's say, by mistake you came home and you realized you bought a bottle of wine that was not kosher, right, but Stam Yenam, so today you're permitted to have hana, which means you can go back to the store and get your money back. You can give it to somebody as a gift, because now that, according to the Ramah, if you are going to incur a loss and it already happened, you're allowed to take the wine and have hana from it. An example he gives is somebody owes you money, a goy owes you money, and he gave you a few bottles of wine in lieu of payment. Take it, because it's a mitzvah to save your money. Then there's another opinion that even the chatchila, you're allowed to deal with Stam Yenim and have Hana today, because today they're not really idol worshippers. We generally don't follow that second opinion. We follow the first one, which is that once you have it, you can give it away as a gift or something and have Hana from it. But you definitely, otherwise you'll have a loss of money. And that is the halach. Okay. The third case here is if somebody stores wine by a goy, are we worried that the goy is going to use your wine to be menasich? And are we worried that the goy is going to exchange the wine that you gave there for other wine, cheaper wine? So he said, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that if you store your wine by a goy, you're not allowed to drink it, but it's permitted in Hana. The Gemara will conclude soon. We're talking about there is one chasim on it. There is one seal on it. Just quickly, we'll have a machlekes the Gemara that the Rav says that chavis, the letters ches, beis, yud, taf, require a double seal, and we'll talk about it later. And one of them is yud, which is wine. And the question is whether wine needs a double seal or wine is sufficient to only have one seal. And and anyway, so the Gemara in the beginning thinks we're talking about there are no seals over here, just a barrel of wine sitting there, and therefore you're not allowed to drink it. We're scared the goy might have done something, but Hana you're allowed to. And we need to understand why Hana is different, because maybe he says the whole yain, stam yainim is only midrabanan, and this is really your wine, so we're even more lenient than that. However, the Gemara will soon conclude we're talking about there's one seal, and we're going to have a machlekes if stam yainim needs a single seal or a double seal. So that's what we're going to focus on right now. Says the Gemara, says that if you mafkid your wine by a goy, you're not allowed to drink it, but it's permitted to know. Said, well, how can it be 3 lines on the top of the page of Lamed Aleph of an Aleph? But now, didn't we learn how mafkid peiroisev eitzel evig gacham? Not do with wine, but if you gave your fruits to a goy for storage, harehein ke peiroisev shel evig gachavim. We say that there's a possibility the goy transferred your paytas or substituted his paytas for your paytas, maybe had better quality, and he gave you something inferior quality. And therefore, as a goy, we have a big machlekes if yesh kinyan l'nochri to throw the hafkia, to take away the din of meiser and shmita. But there's one opinion that says that even if the goy, Israel, he does not have he cannot remove the iser of shmita, nor can he take away the mitzvah of Meiser. So if he purchases from them, they have to follow all the laws, and that's what this Mishnah follows, that opinion. So we're scared. The main purpose here is the focus is that it's possible the guy will substitute his paytas for yours. And l'shviyas or the Meiser, we have to treat it as if this might be Shemitah, and this might require Meiser. No, so how could Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to have anah from the wine? Maybe he substituted. Says the Gemara. We're talking about an exceptional case. He placed it in a special room, and he gave him the key. They gave the Yid the key, or the Yid had a seal on it. And because he had either a key or a seal, therefore we can trust that everything is all right. Says the Gemara, if there's a seal or a key, he's b'shti and amilishtre. Why then do you forbid him to drink it? The guy didn't touch it, and therefore why he didn't tamper with it? Why shouldn't he be able to drink it? So Rabbi Yechon once came to a city called Parvid, and there in that city was a Rav was the Tana Bar Kapara. Omar, he asked around, Klum Yesh Mishnah Bar Kapara. Can anybody relate to me a halacha that Bar Kapara said? Tanchum to mean Parvid. So there's a Tanchum who came from that city, who was in that city, from that city, said it to him, yes. This is what Bar Kapara said, that Hamafki, if somebody stores, if somebody stores his wine by a goy, muter b'shtia, you're allowed to drink it. Talking about there's a seal. Kori alei, Sabich made a comment, the pasuk where it says that Mokai Shiyipol Eid Sham Yir Sham, where the tree falls, that's where he is. In other words, in the place where Bakapara lived, that's where he remains. Now the question is, Sham Yir Sadat, he remains. He passed away. If you want to know what a person said, you want to know a person's legacy, go to the city where you live, because the people around, the neighbors and everybody else, they're totally familiar with his legacy. Anyhow, what is even there? If there's a chsima, if there's a chaysim, if there's a seal, then you're allowed to drink it. So how come Rabbi Yehuda ben Seder says you can only have hana, not drinking? The first Rabbi Seder's attempt is to say there's no question. Why? He wants to say no. In fact, it's a machlekes ha Rabbi Lezer ha Rabbanan. There's an argument Rabbi Lezer and Rabbanan whether a single seal is enough. There's an argument if a single seal is enough or not. And the Rabbi Yehuda Seder will side with one, and others will side the other. What's the story? And this Mishnah is with the other. So what the time we learned, echad halakeach, whether some buys echad haseicha bayis v'chaser, or you rent a space in the courtyard of a goy, umalu yayin, and you filled it with wine, or b'mafteach oy chaysim bad Yisrael, the key or the seal is in the hand of the yid. Rabbi Lezer says, Matzit, well, you have a seal, one chaysim is good enough. You can go ahead and drink this wine. And the Chachamim say one seal is not enough. We'll soon see there's two ways of learning the Chachamim, but right now we'll say you need two seals. You need a chaysim, a chaysim in order to be able to drink that wine. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Seder follows the view of Rabbi Lezer, and therefore you're permitted. And the Chachamim, Bar Kapara follows the view of Rabbi Lezer, and the Chachamim, they ask it. They ask us to drink it. That's Rabbi Yehuda ben Seder. So how come it's mutar ba'ana? So we said because it's Rabbanan, we're more lenient. And it's your wine. The son of Rabbi Chibah is the name of Chizah. The name of Rav. The other say Rav Chizah Amaziri. This is he said halacha Rabbi Lezer. Halacha Rabbi Lezer, which sounds like if you just learn the Gemara here, the halacha is straightforward. You only need one seal on a bottle of wine. That's what it seems from here. And we'll come back to that soon. Rabbi Lezer says, Rabbi Lezer disagrees. He says, everything is sufficient, everything is sufficient with one seal. The Gemara later will talk about 8 different kinds of products, whether it needs one seal or whether it needs 2 seals. And Chutz min hayayin, and Rabbi Lezer says, no, wine is different. Rabbi Lezer disagrees with Rav. He holds you need, I hold like the Chachamim, that you need 2 seals. And Rabbi Yechon agrees with Rav that one seal is sufficient. And v'lei pligi. So they're not arguing. What do you mean not arguing? Ha Rabbi Lezer, ha Rabbanan. Just saying that this is the view of Rabbi Lezer, and this is the view of the Chachamim. Says the Gemara. Now, the two versions of understanding what exactly they're learning the machlekes is. Ikadamri, that's one version. So Rabbi Lazar is basically passing like they're not really arguing between themselves. They're just telling you who the Allah is like Rabbi Lazar or the Chacham. However, Ikadamri, there's another view. Amar Rabbi Lazar says, Hakon mishtame b'chayis. Rabbi Lazar says everything needs a double seal. Chutz min hayayin she'ein mishtame b'chayis v'chayis. Rabbi Lazar is being even more stringent. He says chayis definitely works for everything, for the rest of chavis. But we'll see later, chavis, toughest, for example, chelis, and beis is basar, meat. If you know everything, a double seal is good enough. However, he says, when it comes to wine, even a double seal is not good enough. That even a double seal doesn't work. And Rabbi Yochanan says that afilu yayin mishtamer b'chaysim b'techaysim. In the second version, Rabbi Yochanan holds, I also hold you need a double chsimer, and that I hold double chsimer is good enough for wine, like the chachamim, but tavaya karaban, and they both are going according to Rabban. And the Gemara explains. Ma'asavar, one opinion says, keep li Rabban like Rabbi Lezer. When does Rabban the first? When did they argue Rabbi Lezer b'chaysim echad? Rabbi Lezer. Not Rabbi Lezer, but Rabbi Lezer, the Tana Rabbi Lezer, he holds that one seal is good enough for wine. And the Chum say, no, one seal is not good enough, a double seal, you need a double seal. That's how Rabbi Yochanan learned, and he passed back Rabbi Lezer. But Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yochanan's student, he holds, he holds that even one seal inside another seal, Asi, the Rabban hold Asr. So we have a machlekes. Now in the first version, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav say the same thing, that one seal is good enough. So therefore, in halacha, we say we'd rather learn Rabbi Yochanan and Rav agree. We try to avoid machlekes in between the two, even though we have a rule. Whenever there's a machlekes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan in Etzisrael. Or if Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish team up against Rav and Shmuel, the halacha is always like Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish, but we'd rather have them all agree. So one chaysim is enough. So then the Rishonim will talk about what we'll chayda. In other Gemaras, it seems clearly you need two seals. As the next line in the Gemara, Rav is going to discuss what does two seals mean? How do you make two seals? Now, what do you need to know for if the halach is all you need is a single seal? And if you need a double seal for other things, that this Gemara should have been relegated to the other when we talk about the other things, chalav, chelis, and all these other things, and basar. So Rabbeinu Tam comes along and makes a chiddush. He says, very interesting, he said there's a difference between a goy or a Yisrael mummer, or Yisrael chashud. When it comes to a guy, a single seal is enough. The guy will be scared to tamper with it, he's scared he'll catch him, and then he'll ruin his reputation or his business and so on. But a Yisrael chashud is not scared. He needs a double seal. If you're storing it with a Yisrael mummer, you need a double. And why? Because the Yisrael mummer is convinced that you would never suspect him. And therefore, he'll take liberties that a guy would never take. That's the view of Rabbeinu Tam. And Tosfos has a very interesting expression. So Rabbeinu Tam learned that all the Gemaras, where it sounds like that you need a double seal, which is the Gemara going in the next piece of Gemara, and other Gemaras we'll have, that's all talking about Yisrael Chashid. I'll just quote you the line of Tosfos, his comment on Rabbeinu Tam. He says, so you, Rabbeinu Tam, want to take all these Gemaras, which seem to be open-ended, and you're going to limit it only to a Yisrael Chashid. So Tosfos here has an interesting expression, and he says, I wish I could find it, he says here, where is it? I lost the place there. Tosfos agrees, but he used the words. Sorry, I can't find the place. He used the words where he says, the words of Rabbeinu. Oh, here it is. Of course, yeah, I'm quoting right in the middle of the Tosfos, the Omar. He says, the nevuyihi. This sounds like he must be a prophet because it's definitely not based on seichel. Lahami kol eila halachas b'Yisrael chashuv. To say that all the Gemaras, where the Gemara doesn't qualify it at all, makes these open-ended statements, is only talking about Yisrael chashuv. He says it must be, and Vanan, but all the Gemara is talking about a goy, and suddenly every time it talks about a double seal, is talking about Yisrael chashuv. He said it can only be nevius because it can't be logic. Anyway. So Taisa comes up with another pshat. Taisa says it depends. If you're selling the wine to people who never put the seal on in the first place, you're sending the wine to somebody else, it's a store, and you're walking in, you have no idea what the original seal was the manufacturer put on, then you need a double seal. But if you're the one who put the seal in the first place and you're going to retrieve your own bottle of wine, your own barrel of wine, you recognize your seal. You right away know if somebody tampered with it or not. So when the Gemara says that it's saying hamafkid, it's your own wine and you're going to retrieve it, then a single seal is enough. But hashaleach, if you're saying it to somebody else, then you need a double seal. And in fact, some Rishonim say that you have to send a letter to the other people, tell them what kind of double seal you have. You have to tell the guy that you're sending a letter to the other person, because otherwise the guy won't be scared to tamper with it, because nobody knows what the seals are supposed to look like. And then there's a whole discussion about the seals. In fact, some of the Rishonim say the best kind of seal. Okay, you know what? I'll tell you in a minute. Let's first go to the next Gemara. Says the Rav, back to the Gemara. So Rav says, what's an example of? Obviously, if you have two seals, one thing that's sealed and with a cemented down, and then you have another lid on top of that, that's obvious two seals. What are other examples of two seals which are not so obvious? Amar Rabba says. So Rabba says, I'll give you a few examples. One is Agoga, the Puma, the Chavisa, that on top there's no lid on the barrel. So what you do is you place on top of the barrel you take a pot or something and you overturn it and place it on top of the barrel, sharika, and you go ahead and you seal it with you seal it with cement and everything else, and then vachasima, you put a stamp on it, and therefore you have two things: you have the seal and then your stamp, and that's considered a double chasima. Like you see sometimes they sell chicken in the stores, they have the tape and everything else, and they have the words on it. The Eloi, for whatever reason, you couldn't do that, then loy. Sorry, the Eloi, if you don't do that, the double seal, it's not a double seal. Another example is the Kula Omedig. You have a lid already sealed, then you put on top of that a second seal. That is, you put on it a basket that is so tight, and you pull it down over the barrel, and it takes a long time to be able to pull it down and get it over the barrel. Therefore, it's considered double seal because it's too big of a bother for the guy to take it out and change the wine. You won't throw the hassle. Tikula umedik. If you take a basket and you cover it properly, have a chaysim b'tei chaysim. But loy med, if it's not tight, you just put a basket on top of the barrel, then loy have a chaysim. That's actually a double seal. Another example is noid b'diskaya. You have a little flask of wine or a little canteen of wine inside a bigger cask of wine. And chasimas people mat. What you do is, if you tie the small flask and you put a knot in it and you turn it upside down, and then you tie the outside of the bigger flask, and so therefore not only is it double, there's two seals, but it's a big bother then to go and turn the other one over and untie everything else. And obviously you have to tell the guy, otherwise he won't know. He'll just open up thinking that he can get there. People might love chaysim, but both are facing upwards, even though you have a knot on top and not the bottom. It's not called double seal. It's a chaysim. But then he says sometimes you only have one. You have one knot, and then you would take the leather, whatever it is, the pouch, and you would bend it in, stick it inside this flask, and then you tie it again. That's a double knot, and that's hard to get back in, because it's pretty tight already. You have to push it in, the top, the flaps, and push them all the way inside into the narrow neck, and then make another knot. Anything which is too big of a hassle, he's not going to tamper with it, and therefore it's considered good enough. These are chaysim b'tei chaysim. That's considered a double seal. So some say that the best double seal is to actually write Hebrew words and have one letter or letters, and one letter on one part, another on another part, and it's very hard to get them together. Others say that you should be in your handwriting. So not only you'll recognize handwriting, and handwriting is very hard to forge. If it's like Sava Shuris, then it's maybe easier to forge. You use your handwriting, cursory letters, then it's much harder to forge. Talmud learned. But Yishayna, in the beginning, they would say, Yayin shal eitz kushi, shal ein kushi. The wine in the city called Ein Kushi, which is a place where the Kusim lived. Now, this is talking about the time before we banned all Kusim from anything, when we discovered that they all went marching to Hara Grizim and they bowed down, they worshipped their idol. Prior to that, we had a big machlekes Rameh, the Chachamim, whether they considered Gedi Emes or Gedi Arayas, but even so, we were suspicious of them. But certain things they kept, they observed. Certain mitzvahs, in fact, we had more Psachim, the second page. Any mitzvah that they kept, I'm talking about matzah shel kusi there. Any mitzvah that they kept, they were restricted than Yidden. So yayin shel kushi, wine in the city of Ein Kushi, it's a city of kusim. At the time before we proscribed them, also still forbidden. You know why? Because right next door to them, the neighboring town is called Bira Sidiki. It's a goyish town. They would come in all the time, and the kusim were not concerned about a goy touching the wine. I mean, they wouldn't pour the wine, but they weren't concerned about if a goy touched the wine. Vishal Barkasa, the same thing. Then another town called Barkasa from Kusim, also forbidden because Kfar Pashoy. There was a goyish town next to them called Kfar Pashoy. Vishal Zagulur also b'fnei Kfar Sholim. So all of these, there's three cities which are inhabited by Kusim, but because their neighboring towns were so close, were goyish towns, and they would wander into the city to do business, whatever it is, so we couldn't buy from the Kusim either. Then they went ahead and said, well, it depends. Chavi is psuchis. If it's an open barrel, asuris, it's also because they need to sell it quickly, so therefore they weren't concerned. Stumis, but if it's sealed, mutaris, because stumis, as we'll see in the Gemara, they made sure the goyim didn't touch it because they knew that if it gets out, they won't be able to sell it. It's a lot of wine there. Because of myself, what changed? First they said that everything's forbidden, and then later on they said, but sealed barrels are permitted. If somebody can please mute themselves.
You are. Maybe you're very healthy foods.
The Korah in the beginning, Savar. In the beginning, we thought Ein Kusi Makbid al Mago Evikachavim. They are not concerned about a guy touching Leishna Psuchis, Leishna Sumah. They don't care if the barrels are open or sealed. All of a sudden, but later on, the Chachamim thought about it again and they reconsidered. Kiloi Kapid Apsuchis. They didn't care about the open barrels. But our stumas market covered. But when it came to the closed barrel, they were very worried because why they closed, because they plan to sell it, and if word gets out that go and touch it, Yidden won't buy, they'll lose a lot of their customers. So they were much more particular about that. Not because they cared about the thing, they cared more about the business side of it. And therefore stumas is very careful. So the Gemara says, Ustumus mutara. So what are you telling me? That if the barrels are sealed, it's mutter. Let me ask you a question. But Aminu, we learned in the Braisa, if somebody sends a barrel of wine in the hand of a kusi, big machlek is showing him if that according to Rashi, we're talking about of a kusi. Okay, I'll get back to in a second. Or it's not just wine, vishel tzir, but let's say the juice of fish. And here we're not worried about wine, but in tzir, we're worried that they're going to change and give you inferior fish and take your tzir away and give you tzir from an inferior fish. Okay, which is treif. Or vishel murius. And murius is where they use the innards to give the oil. They use the innards of the fish, which is quite expensive. And the same thing there, might swap it around. Is biyad he sent it with a goy. Now and with Murius, we're scared that maybe they'll put it because wine was cheaper. If wine is cheaper, they would substitute, put a little bit of wine in there instead of the fish innards or the fatty part. Is so therefore you have to put a seal in it. If you recognize a seal, it's good, and if not, also it's forbidden. It is forbidden. So we see we're talking about a barrel over here and it's sealed, and yet we are still worried. We're still worried that are going to touch it. What do you tell me that they were very particular? Talk about a kusi here, sending with a kusi, a sealed barrel, and you said a minute ago we're not worried. And here it says clearly that you need a chsim and everything else. We're worried that a guy might touch it, and the kusi won't be concerned. Says the Gemara. I'm going to play the kasha. There's another question. Can be can be derech. It depends where it's taking place. In the city, he's very concerned because if people find out that a guy touched it, he'll lose all his business. However, but then if there are very few people on the roads, that nobody will know the difference. And therefore, he's not very particular. He's not that careful. Says the Gemara, Maskul Rabbi Yirmiyah said, I don't understand. Most people don't manufacture their own wine. They import it. So every barrel of wine had to be one time or another on the derech. And if you tell me that every barrel of wine that was once on the derech, we're worried that a guy would have touched it, so how come you said before in those cities, in Kusim, that you're allowed to buy the sealed barrels, but they were on the derech to get there? They didn't have to go by the derech. El Rabbi means the following. Bein Hagitas, when it was the season of when they used to produce the wine, and there were plenty of people traveling in these areas of the wine countries, Soninu, that so many people there mirtis. That's when they are worried and they want to make sure that no guy touches the wine. So they're very careful. Omar, he says, Hashtanami, they're going to see me, massively, I'm going to lose all my business. So that's the cases of those three cities that we said is permitted. When are they permitted? They're permitted if it's in the season of the wine. But if it's not the season of the wine, then people generally are not there, then we cannot trust it. Now, according to Rashi, Rashi says if somebody sends a chavis with a kusi, and Rashi then says, surely if you send with a goy, you need, now there's one more qualification in this brisa here. The qualification is not enough to have a seal. It says here you have to recognize, you have to recognize the seal. And just tell me what you did. That's what Rashi. So that's what Mishnah Brisa says. And according to Rashi, kol shkein biyad oivik, you need to recognize the seal, which is a very big chumrah. It's not just enough to have a seal. You have to recognize, be aware of what the seal is before you look at the seal. However, Rabbeinu Tam argues, and he says we're dafket talking about a goy because the next case in the Brisa it says or murius and tzir biyad oivik chavim. So it means the first case is necessarily talking about a kusi. But when it comes to a goy, you don't even have to recognize the seal. As long as there's a seal, we said before already, the goy is scared and he won't tamper with it. Anyhow, there's a big machlekes of shaynim here. Others say that when it says here recognize, it doesn't mean recognize the seal. It means anybody else doesn't have to worry about it. You get a seal, it's good enough. It's only the balabos if he recognizes that the guy didn't tamper with it. Because he knows what he did that he put there, or he happens to recognize that he wasn't tampered. If he wasn't there, there's not a problem. But if you're there already, then look at it to see whether it was tampered with or not. And this long traces here gives the different ideas of how one should actually, what kind of seal ideal seals are. Okay, back to the Gemara. Itma we learn, why did, there's another version from Amru. Why did they come along and say that the beer of a goy is also forbidden? Can you imagine? Taisa already says it's not in the Mishnah, it's not in the Brisa. This is a later addition to the whole concept of keeping away from goyim, as we'll soon see, like Stam Yenim. So they also add another layer of beer. We'll talk in a minute to how come today we're allowed to drink beer. So the Gemara says here, why did they ask beer as well? They have two opinions. Again, we are worried about socially interacting, and beer, brings levity and whatever in the next steps. So, and Rav Nachman says, we are concerned. Remember, we learned a couple of days ago that if something is left overnight uncovered, we're worried that snakes will come and leave their venom behind. So the Gemara, when you say Gilui, what exactly are we concerned? Which stage of the process of making beer are we worried about Gilui? Are we talking about Gilui, are we talking about when they're actually brewing it in those big, pots of big, barrels or vats? Is that where they're brewing it? And we also leave it open because we know that the snakes have no attraction to that. They don't like the smell, they don't like the taste, whatever. They don't come. The chavisa we're talking about in the barrel itself. Once you have the final product of beer, you leave the barrels uncovered. And we do the same thing because we know that snakes are not attracted to it. So what is the problem of gili? We need it. But asra de metzalu mayev. You remember we learned a few days ago, they used to draw water from a well and let it sit for a couple of days. So all the particles and the pieces will fall to the very bottom. And then they would strain it. And that was this very special water. And that water, if it sits exposed, they what do you call it? The snake might drink from it. If so, Yoshan Tish today, if that's the case, then if let's say the beer ages and it ferments more, it should be permitted because we know that the venom of the snake prevents it from fermenting further. And if it did ferment further, is that there's no venom there. So what's the problem? Because the venom there does not allow it to age. Hechmitz, if it fermented, mutter. Why? Because ein manichil hachmitz. The poison somehow or another prevents it from fermenting. So the Gemara says you're right, but you know why it's still forbidden any kind of beer? Because Gzeira Yoshan Atul Chodesh. We allow certain beers that people don't know the difference and they don't understand the nuances. You make a Gzeira, it has to be across the board. Says the Gemara, talking about beer, our Papa, he would drink beer. He would eat it outside of the store, drink it outside the store. In other words, our Papa clearly learned the problem is socially interacting. So if he drinks it outside of the venue, no problem. And Vishasi drank it there. Rabbi he was stricter. Maisa lebesi, he would buy the beer in the store, bring it home. Vishasi and drank it. And both of them follow the view, but Tavayim Mishum Chas. They both follow the view. The problem is the interaction. And therefore, if you take it home or outside, it's not a problem. Rabbi Choy, Ovid HaChoki Yiseta. Rabbi Choy was just a bit more stringent. He felt even outside the store is not good enough. He went home. Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna. Now, Teresa says, how come today we're not makpid on beer? And Teresa says, interesting, when is beer usher? Only if in drinking it in the store or in the guy's house, only if you do it b'derech kvius. You go to the same bar all the time, and therefore you're creating a relationship. But if you're doing it ad hoc, you buy, if you go in a place and you buy a beer and drink a beer ad hoc, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an eifin kvius. An eifin kvius. Yet we don't say that when it comes to wine. Says the Gemara further. Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna, Rav Shmuel Bisna, Ikla Maguan. The Taisa brings an interesting thing. If you're eating in a goy's place and they offer you beer, there's a concept called Ava, which we had a few days ago. Because of Ava, we permitted certain things. And for Ava, you're allowed to drink the beer in the goy's house. If he's the host and they give you a beer, you can drink there. Rav Shmuel Bisna came to a place called Magua. And Aisele Chamra, they brought him beer. Now, Magua, according to Rashi, was a city of Eden that were choshed, Eden that were suspect that they weren't very careful about yain and so on and so forth. I said, we're on wine, well, you should drink it. I said, we're on beer, well, you should drink it. Said he didn't drink the wine. I understand, he didn't drink the wine because he's worried about yain nesach. And even though that maybe they didn't do themselves, but they would drink wine from a guy, they didn't care. Why didn't he drink the beer? It's a Yiddish house. You saw what's the word about? And nobody uses beer for libations. Says the Gemara, Mishum Shimtza de Shimtza. Because we know this is like a second generation. We're going to asr beer because beer is closely associated with wine. And wine we said is asr because of yayin nesech or because of chasnas. And therefore we also extended it to beer as well. It's called Shimtza de Shimtza. Amar Rav says, Hi Shikra Damo. Rav said that Shikra for Aramean, Shadi is permitted. But I want you to know his beer is permitted, but the Chia Bri, Chia, my son, Rav had a son called Chia, named after his uncle, Loi Nishta Minei. He should not drink from the beer. Says he, I don't understand. If beer is permitted, then why should his son drink it as well? And he also is forbidden, then Lukliyamas, it should be forbidden to everybody. El Rav Sova, Rav holds, Mishum Giluya. Rav holds the problem is the venom of the snake. Not because of the social interaction, then it should be a difference. He holds the venom of the snake. No boss. But Ozil Merura de Kashusa, he says that the bitterness of the hops, the colonizir, the bitter of the hops, weakens the strength of the poison, of the venom. So therefore, an ordinary healthy person, it no longer has an effect. But those who are sick and their immune system is down, they will be affected, even though the poison is much weaker. And the Chia Bri, Chia, my son, lucky because he's not that well, you shouldn't drink from it. All creepy crawlies. Yesh lehen aras. They also everything has venom. The difference is shalnochas memis, the venom of a snake can kill you. The venom of these creepy crawlies, ain't a memis. They don't have the capacity to kill anybody. Omalei Shmuel, we're talking about Chia, the son of Rav. Shmuel called in Lechia Barav. He once called in, remember, Shmuel outlasted Rav. Rav lived, according to some, for over 400 years. Rav lived a very long time, but he passed away before Shmuel. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda, who was Rav's main Talmud, and we always have Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Barav, Amar Rav. After Rav passed away, he moved over to Shmuel, and then we have a whole bunch of Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Shmuel. And so Shmuel called in Rav's son Chia, and he said to him, Bar Arya, you the son of the lion. So he was giving a wonderful title to Rav. He said, let me tell you something nice your father once said. Your father once said, he said, Hani Armo. He said that these Arameans, Zukana, he said that these Arameans is Zukana, the Havashosig Mesa. He said, that these are Arameans that are fat and big. He says they drink gilu and they don't die. You know why? Because I did the ochlish gotchim and moshim, because they eat all these creeper crawlies. Chavil gufayu. They have a very very warm blood, and therefore any venom that enters their body, the blood basically kills it, and that's why they survive gili. We're much more edel and much more refined. We don't need shkotzim and amasim, and therefore we are affected by the poison. And in this regard, in other places, we said the other way around. In other places, it says in Mor Shabbos, because as Tesis points out, that we are so worried about being Mekayim the mitzvahs properly, we're also very warm-blooded and very, very passionate. And if we have very warm bodies. So in certain regards, that works, in certain things doesn't. Take more advice. Rabbi Yisrael said, Hi, Rabbi said, Hi chola de shikra, that with vinegar made out of beer. The armoa, from these armoa, also they're forbidden. Why are they forbidden? Because the ma'arbe, they mix into their beer, they mix it to make vinegar. Durdaya de yain nesach, the leftover sediments from the wine of yain nesach, they mix into the beer, and therefore you're not allowed to drink it. But if they bring you the wine from their warehouse, where they keep the wine there for longevity, that you're allowed to. You know why? Even the ma'arbe, Mr. Soda, if you mix in pieces of grapes and sediments and all that, it actually does not have a long shelf life. It'll ruin the beer. If he keeps it in his warehouse, which means he plans to leave it there for a long time, he won't mix it in. He won't mix it in at all. Okay, we'll stop over here.